And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth. A great day with our show, because we have the great privilege of welcoming back to the show Andrew C. McCarthy, who is a senior fellow at National Review Institute, an NR contributing editor, and a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. One of the most reliable and insightful legal experts in the country. And he has a new column that appeared in National Review about the Comey indictment. James Comey, the former FBI director, has been indicted for threatening, apparently, by taking a photograph of some seashells that were arranged on the seashore. And those photographs had the two numbers 86 and 47 in them. And the claim, of course, is that anybody would read those numbers and understand that they were a threat to the President of the United States. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but not too much. Is it, Andy?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's an oversimplification at all. That's their case. And I think, Michael, it's why they don't have a case.
Okay, so the essence of this case is they are charging that this was a direct threat to the President of the United States, which is illegal. And they claim that they have evidence of the nature of that threat, but that's not been released yet. To which you say?
I'm highly skeptical, and I think what they say they have evidence about as a legal matter is actually kind of beside the point. To make this as simple as I can make it, every crime, every federal crime, is a statutory crime, which means it's based on a law that Congress has passed. And in the criminal law, every criminal offense has at least two components. What we call in the Latin, the actus reus and the mens rea. The actus reus being the active element, the action that you have to take, and the government has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to show that you're guilty. And then there is the mental element. Sometimes that's spelled out in the statute, something like willfulness or intentional action. Sometimes it's implicit in the criminal law, even if Congress doesn't include a mental element. What the Justice Department people who have discussed this have been talking about is this mountain of evidence they say they have about Comey's intent. And my point is, you never get to the intent component of a crime unless you can first prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused did the active element that makes the conduct criminal. And what Comey did here under the Supreme Court cases is not what's known as a true threat. So if the government can't prove a true threat beyond a reasonable doubt, it wouldn't matter. I seriously doubt they have evidence that Comey wanted Trump killed. But even if they could prove that, they wouldn't be able to prosecute him unless they could show that he actually committed a true threat. And 8647, whatever else you can say about it, is not a clear, dangerous exhibition of meaning that you actually want to cause harm to someone. So I just don't see that they have a case.
If in a related case like this, would it be any different, a different verdict in your opinion, if this had not been written out in numbers, just the numbers 86 and 47? If somebody had written in seashells on the beach, President Trump is a terrible president and he deserves a bloody death. If someone had written that out and then taken a photograph of that and distributed it, would that have been a criminal action?
I don't think so. And the reason is the Supreme Court decided a case, Michael, in the Vietnam era called the Watts case. And what it involved was a draft resistor who was making comments about the effort to force him to sign up for the draft and participate in the war. And what he basically said was, if they ever forced me to do it and gave me a gun, the first thing I would do is turn it on LBJ, which is obviously a much more explicit threat than anything.
It's a terrible thing to say, but so
right.
what happened? What happened to the guy?
The Supreme Court said that in the United States, where we venerate free expression and where political rhetoric, political speech is the core of First Amendment protection, people are allowed to say things that are utterly obnoxious and even implicitly or explicitly violent without those statements being actionable. So I think in particular, when you're talking in an area that goes to the core of the First Amendment protection of political speech, it's very hard for the government, absent something along the lines of, somebody saying, President Trump, I'm going to kill you. It would be very difficult to make that case.
In other words, it has to be, what you're saying is that it's not intention. It's an actual direct threat.
If I could just try to make it comprehensible, let's say you want to sell me heroin. You have every intention to sell me heroin, and you hand me a bag of powder that you think is heroin. And it turns out it's not heroin. So despite all of your intention and all of our discussions about it and everything else, the government can't prove a heroin distribution because you didn't commit the act that the statute lays out. And I think that's what happened here. Comey hasn't made a true threat.
Okay, you talk about true threats. You talk about a case involving somebody named Billy Counterman. That is a much easier case to prosecute, you say. And why?
Well, Counterman, first of all, the charges against him did not just involve threats. He was actually stalking his victim. And that was a situation where there was no political speech component. These were two private actors. He was stalking, I believe, a woman in his neighborhood, if I'm remembering the facts of the case right. And the thing about that case, Michael, is that the Supreme Court took it as a given that the statements that Counterman made were true threats, and they outlined them in the case. The issue in the Counterman case was, even if you have a true threat, what does the government have to prove in the way of state of mind in order to convict? And what the court said was that the defendant had to be shown to have at least reckless state of mind. But everybody on the court agreed that what was there was a true threat.
Okay, so what about some of the threats that President Trump has been issuing about trying to prosecute and imprison his predecessor, Barack Obama, for treason? Is that the kind of thing that is legally viable? No matter how much the president writes about it? We will get to that and to more with our very special guest, Andrew McCarthy of National Review.
Sign up today for our free weekly newsletter at michaelmedved.com.
And on the Michael Medved Show, we're speaking to Andrew McCarthy about the Great Seashells case. Seashells case. Yes, we need to get that right. I beg pardon?
She sells seashells by the seashore, right?
Yes, there you go. There you go. This is this is why you're such a formidable attorney.
Yes.
Andrew is a former assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, who has helped to convict and imprison some of the most notorious terrorists in our recent history. Okay, the hatred for James Comey and the hatred for Barack Obama are so obvious with President Trump. He just did on one evening and early morning 55 posts on Truth Social, and most of those posts had something to do with getting revenge on Barack Obama. I'm not sure what he wants to get revenge for. But what about President Trump's basically tweeting out, putting on Truth Social, imprison them all, arrest them all, prosecute them all? They all have committed, and this meaning not just James Comey, but the former president of the United States. Are these threats that I mean they're not a good thing, but what's the legal status of this kind of very public expression?
Well, so there is a legal case that's open, or an investigation that we've heard many times is being conducted by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Florida, which is reportedly proceeding on the theory that a cabal of mainly Obama-era officials had a long-running conspiracy to violate Trump's civil rights by impeding his ability to run for president. And I have significant doubts about whether that's a viable legal theory. I think that's the reason we haven't actually seen an indictment, even though they've reportedly been at it for a long time. But it's all the usual people that you've heard about all these years that they're targeting. John Brennan, the former CIA director, Clapper, I guess he was director of national intelligence, Comey, Strzok, Page, the whole
Jack
group
Smith.
of them. Jack Smith, yes. And part of what they want to link together here, Michael, is the Russiagate stuff in Trump's first term. The idea that they concocted this lie that he was a Russian operative, and that gets somehow stitched together with the theft of the 2020 election, which is Trump's biggest thing and what he's put the Justice Department to work on most, the idea of trying to prove that the 2020 election was stolen from him. And then finally, the Jack Smith lawfare prosecutions. I don't really think they have any legal basis to do this. And I think part of the tragedy of Trump's presidency, which given that he won close to a majority of the country unexpectedly, he did start out his term with some promise, but I think he's decided he wants to be the president of the MAGA base rather than the country. I think most of the country is turned off by the lawfare. Frankly, I think the reason Trump is president is because they were offended by a lot of the Democrats' lawfare. But to speak about Obama in this vein is particularly preposterous from Trump, because even if you could prove that Obama abused his powers in the way that Trump is suggesting, the same immunity principles found by the Supreme Court that were the reason Trump got out from under the Jack Smith prosecutions would redound to Obama's benefit if anybody was ever daft enough to try to charge him with a crime. So he has immunity just like Trump had immunity, and Trump knows that. So the fact that he's saying this kind of stuff, I think, is for the Unfortunately, I think it's for the entertainment of his political base, but I don't expect it to be more than that or to go anywhere. I think it's very bad for the president in terms of, I mean, just look at his declining poll numbers. The rest of the country doesn't like this stuff, and he should know that better than anyone else because he wouldn't be president if it weren't for the Democrats' lawfare.
Okay, it's again a very complicated issue with the Brennan and Bolton cases. They've also been charged. Do those cases have a better chance of actually moving forward and getting a conviction than the case against Comey?
So Brennan, as I understand it, is under investigation. He hasn't been charged at this point, but they are very serious about trying to charge him. I've written about that investigation a bit. I don't think they have a viable perjury case. They want to go after him for what they allege are misleading testimony that he gave in the Senate. We'll see if they actually get that case across the finish line. The Bolton case is a fairly serious case, and I'm sad to say that because I think very highly of Bolton. But it's in a different category, I think, than the other cases because they do have some documentary evidence of potential mishandling of classified information. And of all the cases that go into this category of persecutions of Trump's political enemies, I think that is the only case that I've seen that is potentially viable.
Wow. Concerning Comey, you think it's most likely that the judge will dismiss this case before it goes to trial?
Yes, I think he'll make a First Amendment motion that essentially argues that the face of the indictment doesn't state a crime because there's no true threat, and that the judge will throw it out before there's a trial.
Let us hope so. Let us hope because one thing that is amazing here is what a waste of effort and talent and money and federal money. All of these prosecutions or all of these attempts at lawfare or answering lawfare are costing the taxpayer. Andrew McCarthy, who has always been a great servant to the American public during his time in federal office, and now it is a senior fellow at National Review Institute and a contributing editor at National Review. You can read his columns up at our website at michaelmedved.com. We will be right back. And breaking news, 2 votes in the Senate, both of which could be construed easily as victories for the Trump administration and for the Republican majority. The Republicans right now control the U.S. Senate by a vote of 53 to 47. And it is considered a long shot for the Democrats to try to flip the 4 seats they would need to flip in order to take control of the Senate. The first resolution, most important, I think most relevant to most people, the Senate failed to advance the War Powers resolution, while more GOP lawmakers broke with their party. For the 7th time, the Senate failed to advance a War Powers resolution that would curb military action in Iran. However, today's vote, 49 to 50, was the closest one yet, with more Republican lawmakers breaking with President Trump and their party and voting in favor of the resolution. For the first time, Lisa Murkowski, the senator from Alaska, joined her GOP colleagues. Susan Collins of Maine was a very tough Senate race coming up, and Rand Paul of Kentucky in voting yes for the War Powers resolution that would restrict President Trump's further conduct of the war without a Senate approval. Meanwhile, John Fetterman was again the only Democrat to break with his party and to vote no. This is the first vote on the resolution since the lapsed 60-day deadline for Congress to authorize the conflict as required by the War Powers Act, which has been on the books for several decades. Meanwhile, there was also another victory for President Trump. His choice, Kevin Warsh, to be the new chair of the Federal Reserve, was passed by a very narrow margin, but passed. The confirmation was for Warsh was making him the 17th chair of the Federal Reserve System, handing the former Morgan Stanley banker and one-time Fed governor stewardship as chairman of the Board of Governors of the world's most influential central bank at a moment of mounting global uncertainty. Warsh will formally succeed Fed Chair Jerome Powell, whose 8-year tenure was marked by several economic crises and a heated clash with the White House to defend the U.S. central bank's political independence. He was confirmed in a 54-45 vote, the new chair, Kevin Warsh, mostly split along party lines, with only Democratic Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania again crossing the aisle to vote with the Republicans in favor of Warsh's nomination. It was the most partisan vote for a Fed chair nominee in history. And what was crucial to the vote was basically Warsh's very effective and good-natured success in making it clear that he would not be a pawn of Trump. He was not being selected to head the Federal Reserve as someone to represent the MAGA-verse, but someone to represent the broader public and the broader needs of the U.S. economy. And speaking of partisan, there is a piece in the Wall Street Journal today by William Galston, and who asks a provocative question. He asks in the headline, are there five parties in America's future? Now, of course, right now, if you talk about small parties like the Greens or like the Libertarians or like the Constitution Party, I don't even know if that's still functioning. There are five parties in America's present, but not five real parties with a chance of gathering actual power. Last week's local elections, writes William Galston in the Wall Street Journal, local elections in Great Britain yielded massive losses for the UK's Labour Party, the ruling party, and the more significant result was what many analysts believe is the impending crack-up of Britain's two-party system. I know there are a lot of people who live in the United States who would love to see our two-party system cracked up, or at least greatly reformed. The recent elections, these were local elections all across the United Kingdom, signal a break with the idea that there are two parties, the Labour Party, which is the ruling party, and the Conservative Party, the Tories. Combined, Labour and Conservative candidates in this most recent local elections received only 34% of the vote combined. In other words, you're talking about 66% of the votes went to parties other than Labour, other than the Tories, than the Conservatives. They went to either the populist Reform UK Party, which actually finished first with 26% of the vote, and the far left Green Party came in second with 18% of the vote. Compared with the last local elections in 2022, Labour lost 1,496 seats, and the Conservatives lost 563, while Reform and the Greens gained a total of 1,892 seats. With the seats being contested, these results represent huge shifts toward the left and right ends of the political spectrum. Mr. Starmer's soft left government, that's Starmer, Keir Starmer, the prime minister, stumbled from one fiasco to the next, and discontent on his left flank helped fuel the rise of the Greens. The failure of Mr. Starmer's policies to improve living standards for Labour's working-class supporters opened the door to massive reform gains in England's north, long a Labour bastion. What does this mean for the long-established U.S. Two-party system? Asked William Galston. A decade ago, Donald Trump, whose politics resemble those of Reform UK, took over the Republican Party without provoking many traditional conservatives to break away. On the Democratic side, when Bernie Sanders' left-wing insurgency narrowly failed in 2016, most of his followers remained within the Democratic Party. But after Joe Biden's economic agenda stumbled, others joined the Democratic Socialists of America and used it as a base for strengthening the left within the Democratic Party. So what is possible here is last year a respected survey research firm x-rayed the electorate and found 5 potential parties lurking beneath the skin of our politics: MAGA supporters, traditional conservatives, the moderate left, socialists, and a market-oriented, socially liberal party of the center. Could that party of the center, if it ever came into being, actually win control of the U.S. Congress or White House? We'll get to that and more coming up on the Medved Show. And of course, people, as we move closer and closer to the midterm elections, are paying more and more attention to the polling, and the polling basically showing that despite the collapse of popular support for President Trump and the very intense unpopularity of his policy toward the war in Iran, despite all of that, the race is very close and has gotten tighter, not more one-sided for the Democrats. It is a race that when you look at what people's intention is, do I want to vote Democratic or Republican for the Senate or for the House or for governorships, there is a slight advantage for the Democrats, but within the margin of error. It is less than a 5% advantage. What's fascinating is when you look ahead to the 2028 presidential primaries, there we actually have a bigger margin, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side in choices for president. Not at all surprising considering some of the publicity he's gotten recently. Marco Rubio has taken over from J.D. Vance, the vice president, as the leading choice for Republican voters. There are 3 candidates who register with 10% or more. Ron DeSantis, who is completing his term as governor of Florida, gets 11% of Republican votes. J.D. Vance, the vice president, gets 30% of Republican votes. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has been something of a little bit of a media star recently. He took over for handling the daily White House press briefing. He took over from the press secretary and did an impressive job. Marco Rubio gets 45% of the Republican vote, so in command of a potential presidential run, which, given the fact that he ran for president before, yes, that sounds very likely. Now, over on the Democratic side, where the candidates are not so obvious, there is a surprise leader. Before, in some earlier polls, this is from the IA polls, interactive polls, and they show that Kamala Harris, who ran last time, was the surprise nominee. The order is number one, AOC. Yes, that's right. She is old enough now to run, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is running number one, and with a fair margin above Pete Buttigieg, who is number two. And then Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who has been more obviously running than any of his Democratic colleagues. He is third, and with Kamala Harris fourth, and other people who are potential nominees like Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, and you also see Cory Booker, who has been campaigning and looks to be making presidential noises, and J.D. Pritzker, all of those very minor selections without a great depth of support. Meanwhile, speaking of joint ticket, J.D. Vance actually shut down the talk of a joint ticket with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, insisted that he is focused solely on the job the American people already elected him to do, despite the fact that very few Americans know what the vice president is supposed to do other than support the president. Here is Vice President J.D. Vance.
Can you tell me a little bit about, the president has been toying this idea of a joint ticket between you and Rubio. What do you think about that?
Oh, man. What I think is there are a few topics that I want to talk about less than what office I'm going to run for years down the road when I'm having a good time and trying to do good work in the job that the American people already elected me to do. Look, as I've answered this question probably in any number of ways. I love Marco. I think he's a great Secretary of State. He's become a very, very dear friend. But I think both of us are very much focused on accomplishing the American people's business right now. If I was the American people, there are a few things that I would hate more than a person who's barely been in one office for a year and a half, who's angling for a job 2.5 years down the road. Let's do a good job now. We just got to keep at it.
Okay, this is a solid and effective response. He's obviously thought about it, and he expresses himself well and sympathetically. And speaking of sympathetically, James Comey is also a good media communicator. He was on CNN, and he was mentioning something in our recent past that really should be called to the attention of President Trump and his most loyal supporters. Something that the Biden Justice Department did that was unthinkable and praiseworthy, that it's hard to imagine the Trump Justice Department following suit. Here is James
Republicans,
Comey.
I know there's a lot trapped in the cult of MAGA, to step back and say, whoa, what if that shoe was on the other foot? How would that be? It would be awful, no matter who's being targeted.
What would you, someone might hear that? I can hear a Trump attorney now saying, well, they did go after him, when he was out of office, and they did indict him. What would you say to that defense?
Take a step back and look at the cases, look at the work they did. And remember this, the Biden Justice Department indicted the president's son. Can you imagine that happening today? Honestly, while you're shaving MAGA supporter in the mirror, look in the mirror and say, could that happen today? And the answer is no, which is a really bad thing.
But after you're done shaving, well, then you want to hurry to the movie. Which movie? The Story of Everything. It has actually been extended with its special showing in theaters around the country. Here is our enthusiastic review.
Now it's time for Michael Medved's Eye on Entertainment.
There's a hugely entertaining and enlightening new movie that takes you on the ultimate adventure, probing mysteries about the existence of life, about reality, about creation. And that movie is audaciously but fairly called The Story of Everything.
Has the universe always been here, or is it finite?
Is there something else that would lay these questions to rest?
It reopens that question of ultimate meaning.
That last voice you hear is that of Dr. Stephen Meyer, who is the director of the Center for Science and Culture of the Discovery Institute in Seattle. He's written a best-selling book that inspired this unusual film. The book was called The Return of the God Hypothesis, and the movie uses some of the best minds in science and philosophy to argue that reality is part of a design, not some series of random accidents.
How in the world did this start? The fact the universe sprang into being at a definite moment seems to me theological.
And it is science that has revealed this.
You can gain more than your share of enlightenment and astonishment as the movie expertly conveys its message that our universe bears everywhere the fingerprints of its creator. And one of the themes of The Story of Everything is no, there is no implacable conflict between science and faith. In fact, those two impulses can work to reinforce one another. Much of the movie includes artistic recreations of reality within tiny organisms and the cells that make life possible. The movie runs 1 hour and 37 minutes long, but thanks to the elegant presentation and the profound contributions of several dozen world-class thinkers, the film never lacks for excitement or loses the focus of its core arguments. It's not officially rated, but young children will probably be lost and disappointed that the movie offers no recreations of dinosaurs. 4 stars for The Story of Everything. We'll be asking further questions to Steve Meyer, maker of that film. He'll be our special guest tomorrow. We'll also cover the controversy in Maine about a Democrat who is a likely Senate nominee who's trying to explain a Nazi tattoo on his chest. And then the New York Times offering a perspective of a new trend, not eating healthfully, but eating biblically. What does that mean? We'll get to that and much more next time in this greatest nation on God's green earth.